Hey guys, Timothy here. I'm going to be jumping right into my review of Shadows over Innistrad. If you've watched any of my videos before, first off, thank you, and second off, keep in mind that I'm looking at these cards from a limited perspective, so sealed and draft mainly. Not really constructed unless something really stands out to me. I was going to get my brother to kind of come on and help me out with it, just to give his voice and opinion, because he plays more constructed and I play more limited, and it'd be nice to kind of see where these cards lie in a constructed format, since I'm not a huge expert on it. But if I think a card has some sort of constructed playability to it, then I'll go ahead and point it out. But the main gist of this is that it is a limited review of these cards, and if you watched any of my videos before and then you've played the formats, you know that I often miss the mark on a lot of my reviews. So if you were to look at my Battle for Zendikar reviews, some of those cards are very underrated and overrated, and I just completely missed the mark on my review for them. But that's why I do this, because pre-release is in 5 days, and I like to get my ideas out in the open. I like to kind of see what other people think of the cards and get myself ready for the pre-release. And I draft frequently, so the more ideas I have, the more often I see these cards, the more familiar I am when the set actually releases, and I feel like I'm ahead of the game by doing these type of videos. So it's more for me to get my ideas out there and kind of see who agrees, who disagrees, and kind of evaluate the cards just by first glance. So we're going to be looking at the white cards first. Again, thank you for watching. If you have any opinions about any of the cards that come up, if you think I'm over-evaluating or under-evaluating something, just drop a comment by and I'll see if I can kind of address my thoughts on it, and I really appreciate your thoughts on it as well. So we're going to jump right in, and our first card here is Vessel of Ephemera. I'm going to do the commons, then uncommons, rares, mythics, in that order. Vessel of Ephemera is a cycle, actually. It's a cycle of common enchantments that cost a tiny amount to put on the battlefield, and then a little bit more, a little bit less to sacrifice and do some sort of effect. The white one here is 2 to put onto the battlefield. It has no immediate effect, but for 3 mana, at some point in the game, you can sack it to put 2 1/1 spirit tokens with flying onto the battlefield. Now, this doesn't immediately look like a strong card, and I think it's fine. I think it's a playable card. I wouldn't want multiples of it, since it is really 5 mana for 2 1/1 flyers. But 1/1 flyers are decent when you're not using a whole card on them, and getting multiples out of one card is a good deal too. A couple things this does nicely is white seems to have a lot of token generation in this set, and in fact the whole set has tons of token generation, as you'll see. But also the new mechanic delirium. Cards with delirium have additional effects or have potent relevant effects if you have 4 or more different card types in your graveyard. So this Vessel cycle, they're enchantments that sacrifice, allowing you to get an enchantment into your graveyard for some sort of effect. Enchantments are probably one of the harder card types to get into your graveyard, so these Vessels kind of fulfill that purpose. And there's delirium in all colors, so having access to something like this is just one step closer to fulfilling your delirium and making your cards a bit stronger. Just in a vacuum, this card is fine. Being able to turn 3 2 1/1 flyers is decent, even if it uses up your turn 2 and your turn 3. It doesn't fit into super aggressive decks, and it promotes kind of these boards where you're pumping your entire team, which we'll see there are a lot of cards for. But I'm not going to really give this a high grade. I'm not going to give it a low grade. I'm just going to say it's a fine playable. Moving on, we get Apothecary Geist. It is worth pointing out with this card and the last card that white-blue in this set is spirit-based, so we're going to see a lot of spirit creatures. Apothecary Geist is a 4-mana 2/3 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, if you control another spirit, you gain 3 life. So if you don't control a spirit, a 2/3 flyer for 4 is okay, not amazing. But as we saw with Courier Griffin in the last set, a 2/3 flyer that gains you some life is actually really good. Courier Griffin was a top common in Battle for Zendikar, and it was still okay in BFZ and Oath Draft. Apothecary Geist, if you get the other spirit on the battlefield, it's a fantastic card. Gaining 3 life and putting a clock in the air. Something I'm really happy to have 1 or 2 copies of, and as many copies as I can get if I'm very heavily spirit focused. Moving on from that, we get Dauntless Cathar. It's a 3-mana 3/2, which is fine stats. The 2 toughness on these type of creatures is a little bit underwhelming since they trade for a lot of 2-drops. But this one has an activated ability. For 2 mana, we can exile it from our graveyard and put a 1/1 spirit token on the battlefield. We can only do that at sorcery speed. This card is very nice. 3 mana, 3/2 is going to trade for something, and if it doesn't, it's going to get in a good bit of damage. And the fact that it has value from the graveyard is really nice. This is probably one of the better uncommons that we'll see in this video. Just a very good value creature at common. It's not overcosted for the extra ability, and just having that extra ability is very, very useful from the graveyard. It means also, since there's a lot of self-milling and milling your opponent in this set, that your opponent might just mill this Cathar, and then it essentially gives you this extra ability to use from the graveyard if you're not doing anything from your hand for the turn. It is only sorcery speed, so you can't like ambush somebody with it, but that's fine. You're not really using it to that effect, I don't think. Moving on, I'm not going to say anything about this card. It's terrible. It's sorcery speed, 1 mana, 5 life, not even an instant. It's pretty bad. It's even terrible in aggro matchups where a creature to block damage would be better than a card from your hand to gain 5 life. That's all I'm going to say. I think this card is awful. I've been proven wrong before, but I feel like I'm pretty right about this one. I would not play it ever. Alright, moving on. Cathar's Companion, little scrappy-doo looking creature here. It's a 3 mana 3/1, which those stats are pretty underwhelming, I would say. 2 mana 3/1s are fine because they usually beat in for a little bit of damage, but 3 mana 3/1s I'm less excited about. Now this one says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Cathar's Companion gains indestructible till end of turn. That's non-creature spell. So put an enchantment on the battlefield or cast an instant sorcery. This guy gets indestructible. It also lets you do that at instant speed. So if you're using a combat trick or you're using some sort of removal spell, this guy gains indestructible as a result. One thing we'll notice is there's a lot of indestructible floating around white in this set. We'll notice, I think, 4 or 5, maybe 6 cards that grant indestructible in some way, shape, or form. So this guy is fine. I think he's more of a filler card than a really high pick, but I would probably run him in my white decks. And I wouldn't really go out of my way to get a high non-creature count because it is just a 3/1. It's not a premium creature. But I think this guy is just fine as a filler card for a white deck. Militant Inquisitor, another kind of theme we have here is equipment in the set. Kind of a mini theme focused in white from what I've noticed. 3 mana 2/3 is okay, not the best. This guy gets +1/+0 for each equipment you control. So he goes from being very mediocre to very good if you control at least one equipment. 3 mana 3/3s are absolutely fantastic and limited. 2/3s are okay for 3, as we saw in Oath of the Gatewatch where everything was a 2/3. If you can get one equipment out, this guy becomes a lot better, and multiple equipments actually pump him multiple times, in addition to the fact that you're probably going to equip him up. And there's some decent limited equipment in this set, as we'll see in a much later video when I go over artifacts and colorless cards. But this is not an excuse to run bad equipment. I would not run Shards of Glass in my deck just because I have this guy. In fact, if I have no really standout equipment, this guy probably would not make the cut in my deck. He is a 23rd card unless you're heavy in equipment, in which case he gets that much better. So you know when you want this kind of card. It depends on how much equipment you have. You know when you don't want it, when you don't have playable equipment. Make your own judgment about it. I think it's a filler card. Inquisitor's Ox. This is a 4 mana 2/5, the first delirium card we're going to see. And remember that delirium is active as long as there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard. So that means you have to have an instant, sorcery, creature, land, planeswalker, or enchantment, or artifact. You have to have at least 4 of those among the cards in your graveyard. Delirium here gives Inquisitor's Ox +1/+0 and Vigilance. So the second you get that 4th card type in your graveyard, this guy becomes a 3/5 Vigilance, which is very strong. It reminds me a lot of a card from Khans of Tarkir called Salt Road Patrol, and you could combine those Outlast creatures to give them multiple abilities. So sometimes your Salt Road Patrol would be a 3/6 Vigilance, and that kind of creature, the toughness on it means it's very unlikely to die, and it just gets to kind of slam in damage. This costs 4. And this type of card usually costs somewhere around 5 or 6 in limited for a common. This is really good if you get Delirium going, and it's actually just fine if you don't have delirium. A 2/5 is not impressing anybody, but for a common, it's fine at 4 mana. I would play it, at least one copy, and if I can reliably get that delirium going, this card becomes much better. The vigilance on it means it's going to block, and it gets to swing for 3 per turn, which is pretty good in my opinion. I think this card is solid. This does raise one of the questions, which I'll be talking about throughout these review videos, is how easy or how hard is it to get delirium active? And I don't really have a good answer for you right now until the set comes out and we've played with it. Obviously, it's not going to be very consistent to get delirium by like turn 2 or 3, but in the long game, it becomes much easier. In certain colors, it becomes much easier, with white being kind of an iffy color for it. But this just showcases the type of cards we're going to get, where they become better the longer the game goes on, or the more focused you are on getting those different creature types. So it's going to encourage a really unique deck build and really unique draft-in type situation, where you, first off, you want those card types in your graveyard, and second off, you have to find a way to get them there. Alright, enough about delirium. Moving on, we have Emissary of the Sleepless. This is a 5 mana 2/4 flyer, so it's a little bit behind curve on just the vanilla test. What it does is, when he enters the battlefield, if a creature died this turn, put a 1/1 white spirit token with flying onto the battlefield. So again, this is a creature that can potentially come with another body attached. It's a total of 3 power, 5 toughness, and flying, assuming that a creature's died this turn. So you're going to have to engineer this in a way where you're playing it in your second main phase, perhaps after combat, where one of your creatures is traded for another opponent's creature, or they've used a removal spell. It's not always going to be 3/5 for 5. It's sometimes you're just going to have to play it out as a 2/4, and it's a little bit underwhelming. So I don't think this card is a high pick. But if you can get that one spirit, or if you have sacrifice effects that reliably let you kill your own creature, preferably your own tokens, this card becomes a lot better. I would like probably to play at least one of these in my deck. It's the type of card that might surprise me and just be a very solid common. But the morbid type effect here is not super reliable, mainly because you have to play it during your own turn. Now, if you can grant this flash somehow, and there are maybe 1 or 2 cards that do it, this card becomes much better. Notice it is a spirit, it makes a spirit, so we kind of see the spirit tribal going on in white here. Moving on, another spirit, Moreland Drifter is a bear, 2/2 for 2, and another delirium card in white. This guy gains flying if your delirium's active. So again, delirium is not going to be super reliable to turn on early in the game, or at least in most matches, I don't think. But in the long game, your 2/2 bear that maybe has already done 2 or 4 damage, it suddenly gains flying and it can start swinging the air. So I like this card a lot. Again, it's always hard to evaluate how good a bear is in a format until you've played it. But as a standard, 2/2s for 2 are okay, and when they have this upside of being able to swing later in the game, they become that much better. I would definitely play 1 or 2 of these in any white deck I'm playing. The delirium is just extra here. If you can't do delirium, this is kind of just a filler card, but with the delirium active, it becomes that much better of a common. Strength of Arms, 1 mana +2/+2 at instant speed. This is already okay. We've seen some cards like this, Lithomancer's Focus, so on and so forth. 1 mana +2/+2 is an okay combat trick, and then this has the additional ability, if you control an equipment, put a 1/1 white human soldier creature token onto the battlefield. Another thing I should mention, green-white is a tribal color for humans in this set. So you're going to see a lot of human generation in white. You're going to see a lot of humans in green. This is a pretty neat card. Again, I don't think it justifies playing bad equipment or this very subpar equipment. It's the type of card that you want the combat trick out of it, and you just want the +1, the 1/1 soldier token as extra if you can pull it off. So I would be very happy playing one of these, I think, if I'm really in need of a combat trick, and I'd be happy playing it much more if I had an equipment in my deck that I was already intending to play. I'm not going to jam an equipment to get the upside on this because it's really not that much, but this does a lot for 1 mana instant. It's probably going to win you a combat and make you a token in some situations, and I think that justifies playing at least one of them in certain situations. We have Stern Constable here, probably one of the most unplayable cards in this set. It's a 1 mana 1/1. You tap it, discard a card, tap target creature. Now, you're going to see discard a card on tons and tons of cards in this set just because it is a Madness set. It is a Delirium set. So discarding a card has value here. But Madness is not a white ability. So discarding a card in white is a lot worse than discarding a card in, say, red or black, as we'll see when we do those colors. Discarding a card to tap a creature is also not very good. So the only time I play this card is if I have some sort of really strong human synergy, or if I'm just super aggressive beatdown and tapping a creature is that important. I think this card is really bad. It goes along with the other 1 mana white, gain 5 life, as probably the worst cards in white at common. So I'll let you judge how much you like a tapper, but I'm not willing to discard a card to tap a creature in most situations. Okay, Puncture Light. I believe this is a reprint. I'm not sure from what set, but it's a 2 mana instant. Destroy target attacking or blocking creature with power 3 or less. This looks a lot like Searing Light, which we just saw, which was the same thing but power 2 or less. And for 1 mana, Puncture Light is obviously much better, and holding up 2 mana is not too much harder than holding up 1 mana. Also, Searing Light was terrible, and I think Puncture Light's going to be pretty good. It's an early game spell, and I've heard a lot of people say, well, Puncture Light may not be good because it lets your opponent's werewolves flip if you just hold up mana. It means you're not casting a spell. Well, yeah, but every deck you play against is not going to be a werewolf deck, so I think Puncture Light is good in a main board. Even 1 or 2 copies, maybe multiples of it, is just going to be great. It can destroy a blocking creature too, which I really like about it. So if something goes wrong, you can respond with a Puncture Light to kind of fizzle an opponent's pump spell. There are situations where this kind of card is bad. If your opponent responds to it with a pump spell, or if your opponent just has a 4/4, it doesn't do as much. And yes, it lets them flip their werewolves if you just pass turn and hold this up without casting anything else. But I don't think that justifies saying Puncture Light is a bad card. It's still a very medium card. It's very conditional removal, but I think it's removal nonetheless in white, and it's at common. So I'd be happy to pick up a couple copies of these in a draft. Alright, Unruly Mob. I think this is the last common. I'll see in a second, but this is a reprint from, I believe, the original Innistrad block. 2 mana, 1/1. Whenever another creature you control dies, put a 1/1 counter on this guy. So your opponent's probably going to, unfortunately, have to use some sort of removal on this before they target your other creatures, which you're fine with. If your opponent is using their premium removal spells to deal with a 1/1, that's better than them using it on your other creatures. If they don't, Unruly Mob is just going to get out of hand over the long game. It is a human, so it fits in the human strategies, but this type of card, it gets out of hand very quickly. If you have a very creature or token-heavy deck, then you can just grow this guy really, really large, and your opponent can't do much about it at a certain point. So they're going to have to get rid of it early, and even if they do that, they're probably going to trade down on mana. They're going to use a more expensive spell to deal with this 1/1, or this 2 mana 1/1 nonetheless. Alright, maybe a couple more comments here. So, Ethereal Guidance is basically a sorcery speed version of Inspired Charge for 1 less mana. 3 mana, creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. It is a sorcery, and that is huge. Maybe there are the type of decks that want this, when you're just flooding the board with tokens, or you have tons of flyers, you have tons of these little 1/1 spirits. This card gets a lot better, but I would still only play 1 copy of it, and I wouldn't be very happy with it. If you have unblockable creatures, this becomes better. But overall, the fact that this is sorcery means that your opponent can see it coming, which I like a little bit less than Inspired Charge. And I didn't even like Inspired Charge very much, but there are times you will play this card. It's when you're very, very token and creature heavy, and you're going for kind of a widespread win. As just a general card in your white decks, if you're playing kind of a mid-rangey long game deck, I wouldn't play this. And I imagine this will be kind of a late draft card. You'll see it very late in the pack. So if you want this sort of effect in your deck, I wouldn't pick it up too early because you're very likely to get it later in the draft. Inspiring Captain is a human knight, and it's a functional reprint of Ampere Tactician with a different kind of twerk on its mana cost. Enters the battlefield, it anthems your board. You get a 1/1 for all your creatures that turn. Again, this is the type of card you want to be very aggressive. You want to be very widespread. If you're just playing a general white deck and you are looking to hit your 4-drop, this card gets a lot worse. You want to make use of that +1/+1 because if you're not, this is just a 4-mana 3/3, and that's less than Excited. If you can make use of that and you can curve into this creature, maybe 2-drop, 3-drop, drop this guy, you should be way ahead of the race that early in the game. Ampere Tactician played the exact same way in Origins, and I imagine this card won't be that much different. Devil Thorn Fox, is a 2-mana 3/1. I already mentioned this, but I like this sort of card. 1 toughness creatures die easy. They trade with tokens. They trade with anything that they hit. But if they don't get blocked, or you manage to snap this on turn 2 and your opponent doesn't have a creature, it gets in for a lot of early damage. So 3/1s usually fit into most of these white decks. We've seen this card a ton of times in a bunch of different forms. But I will usually play this in my white decks, and I would very rarely cut it unless my opponent has kind of 1 damage sweepers or something like that. But not much to say about it. I think it's a playable card. I think it's solid. I think it's slightly above filler status. Survive the Night. 3-mana instant. Target creature gets +1/+0 and gains Indestructible. Another Indestructible card here. And Investigate. The Investigate mechanic works like this. Whenever a card tells you to investigate, you get this artifact token called a clue that enters the battlefield. And at any point, you can pay 2, sacrifice the clue, and draw a card. We're going to see a lot of this. It is focused in white, blue, and green, I believe. And it's hard to evaluate right now. It's not quite a cantrip. It's a delayed cantrip. You have to invest mana into it. But I think it's a little bit better than it sounds. I think there are plenty of times in Limited where you hold up mana on your opponent's turn and you use some sort of removal spell, and you've still got this 2 mana left over, and you just get to draw a card with it, sacking these artifacts. There are also a lot of cool things you can do with the artifacts, which I'll mention when you get to them. But we'll see a lot of Investigate cards. As for this card itself, again, it's not really a cantrip. It's more of a 5-mana cantrip if you're going to use that clue right away. But the effect is decent. I should have put a card here. I believe Make a Stand in Oath of the Gatewatch was the same exact thing, except it covered all your creatures instead of just one. I think this effect is still fine. It gives you a power boost. It means your creature is going to survive, and save for some sort of weird exile effect or shenanigans where they respond with another pump spell or something like that, removal spell, then your creature should be fine. The flavor is really nice. I think it's sweet. And I would probably play one of these, not too many of them, even though I like combat tricks that are going to guarantee your creature survives, and the Indestructible will more than likely do that here. The Investigate is a nice upside on it, and I'm happy to see that there. Without the Investigate, it's a little bit less exciting, but I'd still play it. So I'm happy to see this card. I think it's fine playable common. Angelic Purge. This kind of stands out to me as maybe the best common in white. It's 3-mana sorcery. As an additional cost to cast it, you sack a permanent. That's any permanent, including like those clue tokens we just talked about. They are permanents. And you just get to exile something, artifact, creature, or enchantment. Anything but a land, basically. This card is great. Sacking a permanent is a cost that a lot of people overlook. This isn't BFZ where everything's going to come attached to, or there's not going to be all these like random Eldrazi Scions, but there are a lot of token generators. There are these clue generators in white, and in worst case scenario, you can sack a land if you really need to get rid of your opponent's best card. This is not quite Oblivion Strike or Isolation Zone, but it's in the same ballpark, and I really like that it gets rid of enchantments too, because there's not a lot of enchantment removal, and there are actually tons of enchantments in this set. We'll see a bunch of them. So I like Angelic Purge. I think it's strong. It is a sorcery, not an instant, and it does cost you a permanent, but it is going to get rid of your opponent's best card, and I think that's well worth it. I would play multiple copies of this, and I think it's going to be a high-pick white card. Thurman Inspector is a 1-mana 1/2. When it enters the battlefield, you investigate, so you get that clue token. This card is very nice. I'm not usually a big fan of 1-mana creatures, and a 1/2, in my opinion, is not really that much stronger than a 1/1. What this lets you do is kind of curve out nicely. It's a human, so it works in those strategies. It gives you this delayed gratification by drawing you a card later in the game, and it works very nicely with these go wide strategies where you drop a bunch of creatures and then you pump the board. This does a lot for a 1-mana creature, and the fact that it's common means that I would be happy playing 1 or 2 of these. The fact that it's essentially a 3-mana cantrip creature is nice, if you want to think about it that way. But it's very versatile for a common and a 1-drop nonetheless, and I'd be remiss to let this go and not even consider it as a creature. I think it's pretty good. Expose Evil. 2 mana for an instant, tap up to 2 target creatures, investigate. So again, you can think about this as a 4 mana cantrip. You can think about it as a 2 mana tap 2 with this delayed cantrip on it. Whatever you want to consider a clue, consider it that way. But this card's okay. I like this sort of effect a lot more if you are beaten down. As a defensive card, it's just okay. You usually see these kinds of effects in blue where they tap something down, and even in blue they're more potent when you are attacking and you're taking advantage of tapping those creatures down. Again, without the clue on there, this card would be very medium. With the clue on there, it gets a little bit better, but I don't think it's a huge pick, and I don't think I want to fill my deck up with multiples of these. Alright, looks like we're moving into the uncommons now. Our first one is Silver Strike. It's 4 mana for an instant, destroy target attacking creature. You gain 3 life. Anytime we see this kind of card, it usually ends up being a pretty premium removal spell. Even though it's conditional, it doesn't just kill a creature and it never gets rid of blockers. It's nice to have this sort of effect. This is a more expensive version of the ones we've seen lately. You'll see like the Kill Shot and the Immolate and Glare here. But it does gain you 3 life, which is nice. It makes it a pretty good pickup against aggressive decks or decks that are beating you down very early by getting rid of something plus gaining you back some tempo in that life gain. And I'd be happy to play 1 or 2 of these. I don't want to overload my deck with these 4 mana conditional removal spells, but I think I'd be fine playing a couple Silver Strikes. Nahiri's Machinations. I think this card's I think this card is very, very good. I may be wrong about that, but I think it's sweet. It's a 2 mana enchantment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gains indestructible for the turn. For 1 in a red, Nahiri's Machinations deals 1 damage to target blocking creature. Now that second ability is kind of just gravy, unless you're in the late game, or unless your opponent's playing lots of 1 toughness, 2 toughness creatures. But that first part is what I'm interested in. This lets you send something into combat very early without very many repercussions. So those 3 ones I'm talking about are those 3 2s that normally kind of trade off for something. This lets you throw them in there without them dying. So your opponent's either going to lose a creature to block them, or you're going to be in this sudden situation where you're racing, and your opponent has to decide whether they're taking this damage or they're losing creatures. I think that second ability will be very good in certain matchups, and obviously it'll be worse in others. The creature does have to be blocking for you to deal damage to it. But I think this card is flexible enough and strong enough as an uncommon that I would play it in pretty much any white deck I'm going to draft, or any white deck I'm going to have in sealed. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I might be misevaluating the power level of this, but I think it's one of the top uncommons in this set. Spectral Shepherd, the type of card I really love here, is a 3 mana 2/2 flyer. We saw that in Shadow Glider in the last set, and that was a fine card. It was just a vanilla 2/2 flyer for 3. This guy has this extra ability. For 1 in a blue, return target spirit you control to its owner's hand. So first off, I mentioned spirits were white-blue. We see kind of a card that mixes those together. This is part of an uncommon cycle. These creatures that have this one-time effect you can grant to their fellow creature type. So like this is a spirit, kind of a mini lord I think is what they call them, where you can give this ability to another creature of that type. Not quite a full ward, but this activated ability lets you bounce a spirit you control back to your hand. This is very good with certain cards. It blanks removal spells. Anytime your opponent has removal open, you can just kind of drop this mana, bounce your spirit back to your hand, and suddenly they can't remove your creature anymore. This can target itself as well, which is really nice. Another thing this works very nicely with is the Apothecary Geist that we already saw. It enters the battlefield. If you control another spirit, gain 3 life. Well, if you're not doing anything else with your mana, this is very expensive, but you use this, bounce the Apothecary Geist, replay it, gain 3 life. It's a very flexible ability. It's very it makes life for your opponent very difficult. You can use it to kind of blank combat steps by blocking and bouncing a creature. I think it's very flexible. I like that it's an uncommon and not a common, and I think it's really sweet. I'd be looking to pick this up mostly if I am blue-white, but it's a fine card as just a white 2/2 flyer if you can't do the activated ability. That card is not amazing, but I would still play it, and the upside here is very, very high. Topple Geist. So first off, the flavor of this card, I think, is just a ghost that goes around knocking crap over, and then it gets delirium, and it just can't stop knocking crap over, which is just the most freaking adorable, ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But anyway, we have 1/1 flyer for 1, right? Those are terrible, right? Yeah, that's still terrible. Topple Geist is still terrible unless you're taking full advantage of the other abilities. So first off, ETB, tap a creature an opponent controls. So you're often going to run this out on turn 1 if you have it and just start pecking damage. Or if you draw it in the late game, it lets you tap down a big blocker and kind of push in damage. So it's fine in an aggressive deck, not the strongest creature, but what we're really looking at is delirium. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, tap target creature that player controls. So it comes down and taps a creature, and then if delirium's active, it taps a creature every upkeep, or every opponent's upkeep. Note that in Two-Headed Giant, each opponent has an upkeep, so you get to tap one of each of their creatures. Delirium's not going to be active from turn 1. It's just not. So this is going to be kind of a not late game, but mid-game to late game relevant ability. But that is a very strong ability. I should have referenced the 4/6 Vigilance guy from Origins. I can't think of his name right now, but during combat, he tapped one of your opponent's creatures down. Topple Geist is not that card. It's not a 6-mana big giant vigilant beater, but that ability to tap an opponent's creature during their turn without investing mana into it is very, very strong. Just Topple Geist scales into the late game really nicely. It pecks in damage early, and then once that delirium's active, your opponent's best creature is just always off on their turn, and it stays tapped until their next turn. So I think Topple Geist is very strong. I don't know how many of them you want in a deck, and of course, if you can't achieve delirium, it gets a lot worse. I would cut it from decks that can achieve delirium. I would cut it from decks that aren't very aggressive. But I like the effect, and I think Topple Geist is just one of the most clever creatures we have here as far as flavor goes. This is a card I'm curious to see what people think about. I know this has been spoiled for a while because it came out in the dual deck, but I'm very curious about people's opinion of Topple Geist. Moving on, we get Town Gossip Monger. This, I think, is the first transform card on this list. It's a 1-mana 1/1, which is pretty awful. You can tap this plus tap an untapped creature you control to transform it. So that means starting on turn 2, if you've already played this and it doesn't have Summoning Sickness, you can tap any other creature. The other creature does not have to have haste or anything like that. Kind of like Cohort, but what we get when we flip it is a 2/3 Incited Rabble. First off, terrible name. Absolutely terrible name. But it attacks each combat of Able. For 2 mana, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and it's a 2/3. So this can't start attacking until turn 3. You have to play the base creature on turn 1. You have to play another creature on turn 2 and tap this. And then on turn 3, Incited Rabble will finally be active. As a 2/3, swinging in. I don't think this card is great. I could be wrong about that. I don't want to invest a lot of mana into it, but it can get in early damage. It can. But it requires you to curve 1-drop, 2-drop, and then, I guess, not have a 3-drop to make the ability relevant. This card is not super, super strong in my opinion. Like I said, this is where I might go wrong, and I might misevaluate it. I don't think this card is aggressive enough, and I hate that line of text. I absolutely hate attacks each combat if able. It means at some point that card is just going to get eaten up if it doesn't win you the game. And I don't think Incited Rabble is winning you the game anytime soon. Let me know what you think. I don't think this card's good, and I'm not really going to look too much more into it, but we'll see. I might be beaten by it. Bound by Moonsilver, on the other hand, I think is absolutely fantastic. So 3 mana for an aura. Enchanted creature can't attack, block, or transform. Very nice there. Can still use activated abilities, so you have a tap creature on the opponent's side of the field. This doesn't stop it, but it does stop transforming, which is nice. Sack another permanent. Attach Bound by Moonsilver to target creature. Activate this only as a sorcery and only once each turn. That's really nice. So if your opponent plays a threat, you can lock it down with this. And then if your opponent plays a threat that's even worse, you can switch the targets. One thing that happens with cards like Pacifism or Suppression Bonds in Draft is Your opponent plays a big threat, and you just have to deal with it, and you slam this on it. And then they follow up with an even worse threat, and you're like, well, I used my removal spell. Sure, Bound by Moonsilver is not a straightforward removal spell. It doesn't stop activated abilities, but it does enough that it's basically a removal spell, and the fact that you can switch it over is really nice. Yeah, sacking a permanent, again, is a real cost, but it's one that you're willing to take if it means shutting down a creature that's potentially going to win the game for your opponent. So I think this is a high pick. I think this is a first pick quality uncommon, assuming the pack is not completely busted, and I'd be very happy to play as many copies of this as I can grab. Griffs Boon. What the actual hell is going on in this art? But anyway, 1 mana aura, another aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and flying. For 4 mana, you can return Griffs Boon from your graveyard to the battlefield attached to creature at sorcery speed. So I think this card is good. I don't think it's amazing. I don't think it's anything to write home about. But one way to win a game of Limited is to put yourself in a position where your opponent can't deal with your flyers. If you give your biggest thing flying, this guy gets in. And what I like about Griffs Boon is you can put it on an early game creature. If you have a 3-power creature on turn 2 or 3, give it flying, let it deal 3 or 4 damage, and then if it dies, you still have access to Griffs Boon from your graveyard. This card is worse in multiples, I believe. I don't think you're going to want to invest all your mana to put multiple Griffs Boons everywhere, but I think it's fine as one of in a deck that has strong power creatures. And again, like, the art is just unsettling for some reason. I don't really want to look at it anymore. Okay, moving on. Not Forgotten. This is a sorcery for 2 mana. Put target card from a graveyard on top or bottom of its owner's library. Put a 1/1 white spirit token with flying onto the battlefield. This is a very hard card to evaluate because it does a lot of different things. It's really, really bad in the early game because it'll often just be a 2 mana 1/1 flyer. But in the later game, it kind of gets better. What it lets you do is rebuy your best card from your graveyard, or you can actually use it on an opponent's card and put their worst card from their graveyard on top of their deck. So say they're playing self-mill, you toss another land on top of their deck so they draw that next turn. You're going to get this 1/1 white spirit regardless. Now, note that this does target a card from a graveyard, so if an opponent has a way to respond to Not Forgotten by exiling the card from your graveyard or removing it from the graveyard somehow, it fizzles the whole spell and you won't get the spirit. This card is not super powerful. At the very strongest, you're going to get a 1/1 and you're going to time walk your opponent. At the very least, you're just going to get a 1/1. So the floor is not very high for a 2-mana spell. I'm sorry, the floor is very low for a 2-mana spell, but it does some pretty neat tricks, and I like that it's an uncommon, so you can't get tons and tons of these and just time walk your opponent into oblivion. I think this card's strong enough to take and play, but this is one of the ones I'm going to have to test out for sure. Open the Armory. 2 mana sorcery. Search your library for an aura or equipment card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle the library. So an uncommon tutor for auras or equipment. What I don't like this for is just when I have an equipment or aura in my deck and I'm playing this. What this does is basically give you a second copy of any aura or equipment in your deck. If you have one that's super playable and is just going to win you the game, sure, but we don't have anything like Spectral Ward floating around here. We have some decent equipment, some decent auras, but I don't think that justifies Open the Armory. I would rather play a creature in its spot or a solid playable card rather than a second copy of my best equipment or aura. If you have tons of auras that shut down your opponent's creatures, like the one we just saw, the 3-mana one, then sure, this card might get a little bit better, but I don't think this card's very good. I think it's very low priority, and I wouldn't pick it up very high whether I have those enchantments or auras or not. I don't think I'm misevaluating this one. I don't believe it's that good. Alright, Near Heath Chaplain. This one is very good. 4 mana, 3/1 with lifelink. That's very, very mediocre. The 1 toughness is not that great. The lifelink does make it a lot better, though. The nice effect here is for 3 mana, exile them from your graveyard, put 2 1/1 spirit tokens onto the battlefield with flying. Do this only as a sorcery. So this is a more pumped up, higher rarity version of the Chaplain card we saw earlier. That one was a 3/2 for 3. Exiled for 2 from the graveyard and gave you 1 spirit. This guy has less toughness and the same power, but for 1 extra mana, you are getting lifelink, And for 1 extra mana from the graveyard, you're getting an additional spirit. This is very, very good. Lots of value from a single card, which is nice. The nice thing here is that a 3-1 is probably going to trade with the same things that a 3-2 trades with. The lifelink is going to make it relevant that you have enough time to kind of make use of these spirits. But this card is pretty much unpassable if you're white. And 2 spirits from the graveyard means, again, if your opponent just mills this card or discards it from your hand, you're getting value off of that. So I really like it. This card is very powerful. Don't be fooled by the 4 mana for a 3-1 lifelinker. The second ability is what really pushes this over the top. Tenacity. 4 mana for an instant. Creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain lifelink until end of turn. Untap those creatures. I really, really like these effects that untap your creatures during your opponent's turn. Because your opponent, if they see you with a tapped out field and open mana, they're going to assume you have a removal spell. This is the type of card opponents do not play around very often until they see it for the first time. So you can really get somebody with this. It gives a huge boost. It gives lifelink to all your creatures. So in a race, this is amazing. If you have a lot of high toughness creatures, you can really push a combat in your favor and turn a game around if you're losing. And in the worst case scenario, this probably will just let you trade with a bunch of things and be ahead in the race because of the lifelink. Untapping things isn't super nifty in white unless you have some really crazy tap abilities, which I don't think we've seen. But I think Tenacity is a playable card, at least as a one-of. I wouldn't go overboard with multiple copies of it, though. Hope Against Hope, featuring Odric, or I guess people are calling him Liam Neeson, but there you go. 3 mana enchantment, Aura, attached or enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each creature you control, and if that creature is a human, it has first strike. This basically makes something a powerhouse. If you're able to pump out creatures, if you have all these white creatures we've seen that generate tokens or make additional creatures or just value creatures that add presence to your board, this turns one creature into a huge threat. Just having 3 other creatures on the field when you play this means that your creature that you're enchanted is going to be a 4/4. It includes the creature that's enchanted as well. That human cause is extra bonus. First strike means that your powerful thing is not going to die to something dumb like Death Touch, which there's a little bit of in this set. So I do like the extra first strike, but you don't have to attach this to a human to be good. That's just extra. I usually warn people against playing auras, but this is the type of aura where you could stick it on a creature and proceed to win the game if they don't deal with it. The same kind of traps are available, though. If you try to put this on a creature and your opponent has open mana and they burn you out, well, fie on you. You shouldn't have done that. But don't fall for the 2-for-1. Use this to your advantage and wait until you know it's going to stick before you play it. Humble the Brew. This is a more expensive version of Smite the Monster, so it's 5 mana instead of 4. Destroys target creature with power 4 or greater, and then you investigate. So basically we're saying 1 extra mana gets us the clue token, and 1 extra mana justifies a higher rarity. Smite the Monstrous wasn't amazing, which is saying a lot for a set that had Eldrazi in it. So I don't think Humble the Brute's going to be that good. The general strength of creatures in this set, I think, are a little bit lower than in the last set. So it's hard to evaluate whether Humble the Brute is going to be along the same lines as Smite. I think it'll be less likely that you have targets to hit with it. But there are certain matchups where I think this is good, namely against werewolf decks where the creatures are going to be really big, or in general, just green decks where you know that your opponent's going to have a big creature. I like Humble the Brute as a one-of in a main board, and multiple copies can come in. It is expensive, but again, that clue kind of leverages the expense of the card by letting you make up for it with card draw later on. Clues, I think, get a lot worse when they're on expensive cards because it's very less likely that you're going to cast the card plus crack the clue in the same turn. But again, delayed gratification is the name of the game when it comes to investigate. This card is fine. It's situational, but it's good enough that it's going to deal with something big, and that's where you want to be with an instant like this, I think. Pious Evangel, another flip card here. This is a 3-mana 2/2 human cleric. When he or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. 2 mana to flip it. Also, you have to tap and sack another permanent. He transforms into Wayward Disciple, a 2/4. So he gains 2 toughness on the flip. Whenever he or another creature you control dies, it drains a life. Target opponent loses a life, you gain a life. So we start off with this creature that's gaining you life when creatures enter the battlefield, and then by getting rid of a permanent, you turn him into this creature that now pings your opponent and drains them a life when your creatures die. There's very nice synergy between these two cards. You're gaining life for creatures coming in, and then when those creatures leave, hopefully you flip this guy and you can start getting value off of them dying. The one downside here is that the cost of transforming him requires you to sack another permanent. So early in the game, that might be a little more hurtful. But again, if you have a 1/1 human or a 1/1 spirit that you don't mind getting rid of, the flip is definitely worth it here. 2/4 is a nice body. The cost isn't that bad, and the fact that this is going to gain you a little bit life over the course of a game is pretty nice. This is the type of card you can kind of sit behind and make tokens and chump all day long, and you'll be very happy with the result. I think this card is strong. Okay, Reaper of Flight Moonsilver. 5 mana 3/3 flyer is the base, and that's kind of the standard I put on a playable flyer is 5 mana 3/3. If it has flying, I'll play it. I think that's good enough, although not exciting. So obviously we're looking at the delirium ability to see how strong this card is. If your delirium is active, so if you have 4 or more card types in your graveyard, you can sack another creature and give Reaper of Flight Moonsilver +2/+1 for the turn. That to me strikes me as extremely strong, especially in a color that's able to flood the board with lots of creatures. This can be a win condition on its own if Delirium's active. So again, if you're playing against certain decks, your opponent's going to have a lot of flying. There is tons of flying in this set, so it may not be unblockable, but it's the type of creature your opponent is going to have to block or deal with right away. If you have enough creatures to prevent a lethal blow out of this sacrifice ability, then your opponent has no choice but to block it, whether they want to or not. This card is very strong. If you can go wide, then this presents a lethal blocker on its own in a lot of the same ways Nantuko Husk does. This obviously is not the same card as Nantuko Husk, but the fact that you don't have to pay mana for the sack is very nice. The fact that you need Delirium, however, to make this a great card is a little off-putting, but I think the base is fine enough that you can hold off on the Delirium and then make use of that later in the game. This can be a win condition, and that's why I really like the card. Abyssinian Missionaries. This is a 4 mana 3/3, which I think there are a lot of these in the set. There are a lot of Hill Giants. At the beginning of your end step, if Abyssinian Missionaries is equipped, transform it. So get an equipment out early, equip this as soon as possible, because what you're going to get out of it is a 4/4. When it transforms into Lunarch Inquisitors, you may exile another target creature until he leaves the battlefield. That's pretty nice. First off, the flavor is sweet. You give these missionaries weapons, and suddenly they're these Inquisitors, right? But you get a power and toughness boost. You're turning from a 3/3 into a 4/4, and you get to Banisher Priest or Fiend Hunter, your opponent's best creature. That's just awesome, which also means this creature is probably going to bash in the turn that you flip it. Well, not the turn you flip it, because it flips during the end step, I believe. Yeah, during the end step. But this card is sweet. So it's often not even going to be a 4/4 because it's equipped, right? So it's going to be even stronger than that. There's playable equipment, like I said. This is pushing the boundary of when you play these really bad equipment. I would be tempted to play a poor equipment spell if it meant flipping Abyssinian Missionaries. I think the effect is that good. Note that they do get the creature back when this guy leaves the battlefield, but I think that's a price you're willing to pay to get it off the battlefield in the first place. So I think Abyssinian Missionaries goes from an okay card to an absolutely amazing card if you can reliably equip it. Moving on, we have Paranoid Perish Blade, a 3 mana 3/2. We've already talked about those stats for that mana cost. This is a cycle of uncommon Delirium cards that kind of get better once they have Delirium. That's really the only way I can put it. They get slightly better when you have Delirium. There's one for each color in uncommon. This guy gets +1/+0 and first strike when Delirium's active. Again, this is white. I don't know that you're going to be able to pull off Delirium in white that early in the game. So this might just be a 3/2 most of the time you play it, but if you can pull it off as a 4/2 first striker and you can do that early enough, this card is a huge beat-in, and it's actually a really huge beat-in later in the game if Delirium's active. It goes from being medium to exceptional in decks that can pull off that Delirium. That's the key there. First strike on a 4-power creature means that you're probably not getting through that, whether it's on offense or defense, and it becomes a huge beater. 3/2 for 3 is fine as a base, so this card is just okay. And it goes to absolutely superb if you can pull Delirium off. Alright, moving into the rare. So Liam Neeson is our first one. This is another Hill Giant, a 4-mana 3/3. And we're going to read this carefully. At the beginning of each combat, creatures you control gain first strike until end of turn if a creature you control has first strike. The same is true for flying, death touch, double strike, haste, hexproof, indestructible, lifelink, menace, reach, skulk, trample, vigilance, banding, rampage. Okay, defender. Yeah, you get the point. Basically, if you have a positive keyword on one of your creatures, when you enter combat and you control Odric, it spreads that out to all your creatures, including Odric himself. So the best way to win with this is drop a flyer. Suddenly all your creatures have flying. Drop a first striker. Suddenly all your creatures are these huge defensive and powerful, impossible to beat creatures. Drop an indestructible creature. We've already seen, 2-3 cards that can gain indestructible. Use that, make your guys indestructible, and then suddenly everybody's indestructible. There's not a lot of hexproof. All of these abilities show up at some point, but any of these abilities make Odric absolutely insane. Double strike is not very common in this set, but if you can pull off double strike on your entire team, well, good game. Lifelink, menace, reach is just okay. Notice that it also says beginning of each combat, not just combat on your step. So things like reach and vigilance have this kind of double duty where on your opponent's upkeep, your creatures are more threatening as well. Meaning Odric is here to win combat for you. It's here to push your creatures in, and it's here to make your creatures unbeatable in combat, given the right circumstances. The thing where Odric fails is that if you don't have a creature with one of those abilities or a way to grant it, it doesn't do anything. It's just a 4-mana 3/3. And that's fine. You still play that if you have the upside. So hopefully you have creatures floating around that have those abilities, and it's not too hard to get a flyer in white, so you have at least that, which means most of the time Odric's going to be a 3/3 flyer for 4, which is awesome. One other thing we have to mention before we move on from this card, because I don't want to spend too much time talking about it now, is it only works during combat and then after that, so your opponent can deal with things in the first main phase. If they deal with the creature that has the keyword ability on it during the first main phase, then this will not trigger for those abilities on combat step. It only triggers on the combat step, and it lasts until the end of the turn. Okay, Declaration in Stone. This is a sorcery. It's a rare 2-mana spell. Exile target creature and all other creatures its controller controls with the same name as that creature. That player investigates for each non-token creature exiled this way. So it's kind of like a detention sphere that replaces those creatures with clue tokens. Obviously, you're going to be using this as a removal spell most of the time on your opponent's best creature. Very rarely will you get more than one creature out of it, but that'll happen sometimes. Yes, it does replace that creature with a clue. So if you exile your opponent's creature, they will get a clue token. They will investigate, but that's worth it. It's kind of like Thought-Knot Seer, where it's worth getting rid of your opponent's best card if it means giving them a random card from their deck. I would do that all the time. There are very corner case situations where you would use this on your own creature as well for the clue token. I don't think that's very common. I don't think you'll do it very often, but it is an option. Also note that even though you don't get the clue tokens off of tokens, which sounds weird when you say it, you can still target a token with this. So if your opponent has a ton of 1/1 flying spirits, you can target this, and I believe it clears all of those spirit tokens. It should, as long as they have the same name. I'm a little iffy on the rules now that I think about it, but this can clear out tokens very nicely, and it does not actually cause your opponent to investigate if you clear a token with it. So Declaration in Stone, first pickable card. It's a removal spell, and I wouldn't get caught up on giving your opponent an extra card. It's worth them drawing a random card from their deck to get rid of the biggest threat on board. One thing to note about that last card, it is a sorcery, so no shenanigans with instant speed stuff. Thalias Lieutenant. This is a rare cycle of wards for each prevalent creature type in the set. Human being the green-white one, so Thalias Lieutenant is the human ward for the set. What we have here is a 2-mana 1/1 with kind of these 2 alternated abilities. The first one says, when she enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on each other human you control. So it automatically anthems up all the humans you control, minus herself. The second ability says, whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on her. Now, this oscillates between being an early game and a late game threat. In the early game, you don't have as many other creatures, so you can kind of build up Thalias Lieutenant with the more humans you play afterwards. In the late game, you've already played all your humans out, but now you can drop Lieutenant and +1/+1 all of them. So I think this card is super flexible. I think it's very nice. Obviously, the less humans you have, the worse this card gets. If you're playing mostly spirits in your white deck and you don't have a lot of humans, this card is cuttable. It's very bad in certain situations. But if you're prevalent, very heavy human-based tribal, this card is a lot better, and I think it's worth taking in that sort of situation. Build around, maybe the humans good, but I don't think they're that good. It's the type of card you want to be paid off with after you know that you're going humans. Alright, Hanweir Militia Captain. I hope I'm saying that right. Hanweir? Sounds weird. Anyway, we have a bear on the surface, 2-mana 2/2. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 4 or more creatures, transform them. Or transform her, I should say. First off, this counts itself, so you need 3 other creatures during your upkeep in order for this to transform. And what you get out of it is this XX creature. Not really X's, but its power and toughness are equal to the number of creatures you control. So the turn this flips, this should be a 4/4, and it should grow from there the more creatures you get. Beginning of your end step, put a 1/1 white and black human cleric creature token onto the battlefield. So absolutely amazing token generator. As soon as you can flip this, first off, there are no conditions under which it flips back. So it's not like the werewolves where if a certain number of spells are cast, it flips over. No, this, once it's flipped, it's flipped. It's never going to die to its own power and toughness because it always counts itself. And it generates tokens on end step. Every end step you get a 1/1. And, you know, a 1/1 doesn't seem great, but it is a human. So it has synergy there. It increases the power and toughness of the cult leader just by adding more creatures to your board. Westvale cult leader gets better. And it gives you kind of this sacrifice fodder or this long game strategy or this go wide. It fulfills a lot of requirements for a lot of different decks just by creating these creatures on your end step. It's a very good card. I think it will be difficult to flip. I would happily use a removal spell to clear it off my opponent's side of the board if I knew that they were close to flipping it. So I don't think it's going to live very often to flip, but I think it's worth taking. I think it's worth investing your deck into to try and flip this creature over if you have some use for those tokens. If you have a mass pump spell or you have human synergies, this card becomes even that much better. And it's just a fine playable card on its base. 2/2 for 2. I've already mentioned that. You'll play that in most decks. Always Watching. So this is a 3-mana enchantment. This is the type of enchantment that you want removal for. Non-token creatures you control get +1/+1 and have vigilance. This to me screams very strong card. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I don't think so. It is double white, so you have that. It doesn't affect tokens, so you have that. But most of your deck's not going to be tokens. Most of your deck is going to be non-token creatures, whether they create tokens or not. And suddenly, they're all above curve. They all have vigilance, so they play offense, and they get to sit back and block. Or they get to attack, and they get to sit back and do activated abilities. This card is just going to push you so far above your opponent that you're just going to get to run them over. If you have flyers, this card becomes incredibly good, and I already think it's great. It just lets you slam with those flyers. All your 1/1 spirits are now attacking for 2, and when you have one spirit out, that doesn't seem like that much of a that much of a huge swing in your favor. But when you start getting multiple creatures going, you really see the difference between a 1/1 and a 2/2. It's phenomenal. I think this card is great. I would be happy first picking it. I don't know that I would move into white if I wasn't already in white, if I saw this card kind of later in the draft, but I don't imagine it'll go late because I think it's a very high quality white enchantment for your creature decks. Alright, now this one's a little iffy. I need your opinion about this guy. Angel of Deliverance. This is 8 mana. I have to look back at the set, but I think this is the most expensive card in the set. 8 mana for a 6/6 flyer, so that's good. 8 mana is a little much for that, but a 6/6 flyer is strong. Delirium. Whenever Angel of Deliverance deals damage, notice that doesn't say combat damage, just any kind of damage. If you have Delirium active, exile target creature an opponent controls. Alright. So I feel like this format's going to be aggressive with werewolves and vampires, the red strategies mainly. I feel like this may be the type of format where 8 drops just aren't going to cut it. 8 is a lot, and unless you're ramping into this, that's going to take you a while to get to, counting missed land drops, so on and so forth. So you may be dead before you get to it. However, if you get to this card, and it does not immediately bite a removal spell, you will most likely win the game. This guy can block, and if Delirium's active, and he deals damage to the creature he blocks, you get to exile a creature. If this guy attacks and he gets blocked, chump blocked by a 1/1 spirit, you get to exile a creature. If it connects and deals 6 damage, you get to exile a creature. Absolutely insane if you get it going. Maybe there's a reanimation spell that makes this a little bit better. I don't really know yet. I haven't looked into it. I don't think this card is going to make it most of the time. I think 8 mana is just too much. But if you manage to survive and you have a healthy life total and you're not in the verge of dying on your next turn and you drop Angel of Deliverance, you should win the game. Assuming Delirium is active. If you don't have the Delirium, this card gets a lot worse and you're probably going to lose the game. But I don't know. What do you think? I don't think it's always going to be a first pickable card over some of the more premium uncommons in the set. But I don't know. I'm definitely going to try it out a couple times. Okay, Drogskull Cavalry. This is a 7 mana 4/4 flyer. So again, an expensive flyer. Whenever another spirit enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 2 life. So nice little passive ability. And it goes very nicely with the activated ability. 4 mana, put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. So its 4 mana ability basically says, get a 1/1 flyer, gain 2 life. This synergizes with your other spirits as well. If you drop a different spirit, you gain 2 life. It nicely curves from 7 to 8 too. So you hit this guy on 7, and then you draw a land on your 8th turn, you can actually activate the ability twice, which is add in 2 flyers to the board and gain in 4 life. So this guy is the type of creature that seems overcosted. 7 mana is a lot. Again, I don't think this format is Oath of the Gatewatch. I don't think it's Battle for Zendikar. You're not going to be able to stuff tons of 7 and 8s in your deck and get away with it. But if this is my curve topper in a spirit deck, I'm very happy to play it. It's vulnerable. One thing to point out is that Throttle is a common in this set. There are commons that deal 4 or 5 damage or can get rid of this type of thing. So sometimes you'll slam this and you won't get to untap with it. But if you do untap with it, you should be able to win the game from there. It can just pump out creatures and gain you life, which is how you definitively win a race. I think this card is high quality, even if it is expensive. Bygone Bishop, 3 mana, 2/3 flyer. That seems great. Somehow when I first saw this card spoiled, I missed the flying on it, and I was like, okay, this card's okay. But it has flying, and that's really good. We get a Spirit Cleric, so it does have that Spirit synergy. And the nice ability here is whenever you cast a creature spell with converted mana cost 3 or less, investigate. So it triggers on casting. Counter spells aren't going to stop you from getting that clue. And it turns your 3 mana creatures into cantrips, basically. It's very similar to Mentor of the Meek, where you play these kind of lower end creatures and you turn them into card draw at the same time for extra mana. But obviously this is going to gather up a lot of clues. There are clue synergies that make this card a lot stronger, which we'll see in some of the other colors. And the fact that this is just base 2/3 flyer for 3 makes it very appealing. I would be very happy to draft around this card and make kind of a more weenie type deck if it means getting more clues and turning my late game into a lot of extra card draw and a lot of little creatures. So very sweet card. Very happy to see it here. Nice that it's a spirit. I imagine I'll be hooked on the spirits more than I will some of the other tribes, but that's just my play style. I like this card. I think it's very good. And Eerie Interlude, I believe, is the last rare before we move on to the 2 white mythics. Instant speed, 3 mana. Exile any number of target creatures you control. Return those creatures to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. If you've watched any of my videos on Eldrazi Displacer or anything like that, I absolutely love blink effects. They're probably a little bit worse in this set, but they're still pretty freaking good. Instant speed, being able to save your creature from anything, is nice. 3 mana is a little bit for that, but this lets you do it en masse. So you get to choose the creatures you want to blink out. It doesn't affect all of them like Ghostway. It lets you pick and choose which creatures are going to blink out. Now, that does leave you vulnerable because they don't come back until the end step, but it does let you save your creatures. If your opponent has a board wipe, you can respond with this, remove your creatures, and then, lo and behold, no board wipe. It lets you rebuy your Enter the Battlefield triggers if there are some really good ones there. And the nice thing is you don't have to pick up your tokens and kill them to use this sort of effect. You can choose not to pick up your tokens. This is the type of card where if your opponent's alpha striking you and it's block or die, you can block and then respond with Eerie Interlude, save all your blockers, soak up all that damage, and then have all your creatures available for your next turn to alpha strike back. I think this card is very good. There are times where it's going to be bad, where you're playing a lot of flip cards and then you pick them up and suddenly they're unflipped because you removed them from the battlefield. Stuff like that. If you are playing a lot of enchantments, this becomes worse. If you're playing auras, this becomes worse. If your opponent's playing auras and trying to lock your creatures down, this gets a little bit better. It lets you just knock those auras off of the creature for a turn. But Eerie Interlude, I love this kind of card. I saw it spoiled in the dual deck, and I really, really loved it. I already like Ghostway, so this is just a better version of Ghostway, and I'm happy to see it. I hope you can find something really crazy to do with this. Let me know what kind of combos you can do with Eerie Interlude, because I haven't really looked at a side-by-side analysis of some of the cards in this set, but I imagine Eerie Interlude is the type of card that has some really absurd combos in this set. So if you find them, let me know. Alright, Mythic time. 2 Mythics here. First off, Descend Upon the Sinful. 6 mana, sorcery, exile all creatures, so a board wipe, and it gets around indestructible, it gets around high toughness creatures, it gets around hexproof, it just nukes the field, exiles them. Delirium, put a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying onto the battlefield if Delirium's active. So the good thing about this is 6 mana means you're more likely to have Delirium by the time you get to cast this card. I would hesitate to cast this card unless I absolutely have Delirium active, unless I absolutely need to. So it's flexible there. You can use it as a reset button if you need to, but it's the type of card you can also hold back on until you're going to get that angel out of it. It's very similar to things like Pointer Outburst, Crush of Tentacles from previous sets where you nuke the board and you have a way to kind of leave your advantage up. It plays a lot like Crush of Tentacles, where I don't just want to play it, I want to play it when it's ideal. And that 4/4 angel is going to be huge. So I'm a huge fan of Wraths. I'm less of a fan of Wraths when they're just regular rares instead of mythics, so I like that this is mythic. It means I'm not going to get knocked out of the top 8 of a PTQ because my opponent happens to have this in their white deck. But I will lose to this when it's cast, and I will win with it when it's cast. It's that strong of a card. It requires your opponent to rebuild and also deal with a creature on top. Obviously, this card gets a lot worse if you're just using the first exile all creatures and that's it. But it's still a serviceable card then, and it's just extremely bonkers when you can pull off Delirium. And speaking of bonkers, we get Abyssinian Archangel. This is the most pushed card. This is obviously made for standard. It's going to destroy you in limited. Your opponent played it. Everything's hopeless. I'm sorry you lost the game. It just... Okay. 5 mana. Only 5. Keep that in mind. Just hold up a hand and look at it real quick. And that's how many lands you have to tap for this thing. Assuming you're not, missing a finger or you have Polydactyl or something. I don't know. 5 mana for a 4/4 flyer. That's good. With Vigilance, that's great. And Flash, that's amazing. When she enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain indestructible. Wow. And then she flips. When a creature non-angel you control dies. Non-angel, sure, right? She flips into Avacyn the Purifier. Sorry for the pause. When she transforms, deals 3 damage to each other creature and each opponent. It doesn't hit you. It does hit your other creatures. Doesn't hit herself. And she becomes a 6/5 flyer. This is ridiculous. Alright, so again, flash. You flash this in on your opponent's turn, mid-combat, or when they're using a removal spell. Gives them all indestructible. They're not dying. Then you have a 4/4 Vigilant Flyer until you're able to flip this. So you get to just beat your opponent down. And you play defense at the same time. And then if you have a way to kill your own creature, or your opponent blocks and makes an unfavorable trade, you get to flip this up, nuke the board, and then start swinging for 6. Yeah, it loses vigilance. Like, great, right? You're dealing 6. It is possible to flip this by killing a token as well. Now, there aren't Scion tokens. If you want to talk about standard, talk about Scion tokens. You can't just sack something. But there are ways to sacrifice things at instant speed. So even though the indestructible kind of makes a non-bow with the flip clause, you can sack one of your own creatures to flip Avacyn whenever you need to. It is worth pointing out, it says transform Avacyn at the beginning of the next upkeep. So if your opponent, even if you fulfilled that condition of a creature dying, a non-angel creature you control dying, Avacyn will not flip until the next upkeep. So if you do this during your opponent's end step and you lose a creature somehow, it will not flip until your upkeep. So your opponent has until then to deal with this. Again, Throttle is in this format. Throttle will deal with this. There are common answers to dealing with Avacyn, but if they don't have that answer, they absolutely 100% will win the game, even if they don't flip up the other side. The 4/4 flying vigilance flash creature here is enough to win the game on its own. This is just bonkers. The fact that it deals 3 damage to an opponent and starts swinging for 6 the turn it flips means that that's a 9-point life swing. And I don't know. I can't say much else about it. It's going to see constructed play. It's that good. It's really just busted and limited. If you open this, you're playing white and you're going to win the game. I don't know what else to say about it. Obviously, this is great. But that's it for the white cards. So we get to end on this really high note. Now, what does white have to offer? It has lots of token generation, which the other colors do too. We'll see it. Tons of token generation, lots of flyers. It has a human and spirit tribal theme going with either green or blue respectively. And it has a good number of delirium cards. Decent early game threats, a good number of ways to grant indestructibility, and a lot of go wide promoting strategies. So it's very focused, I believe, focused on tokens and beating down and creating board state. Kind of a typical white thing to do. It has removal spells, the type of conditional removal spells you're used to seeing in white, but I think white is strong. Now, I'll have to do all my reviews of the colors to kind of get my feel for what I think the best colors are. But I think white looks very strong right now, and it has some very powerful effects. So let's take one more look at that. But there you go. What do you think of white? What do you think the best commons and uncommons are? What do you think of some of the cards I've pointed out? Do you think Avacyn is that good? Do you think Eerie Interlude is good? I don't know. Let me know. Yeah, I'll be back. I'm just sitting here reading this card again. All right, I'm done with it. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are, and I will be back next time for the next color on this review. I haven't decided what it will be yet, but thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you later. Thanks.